Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth.
Not a day goes by when China and its behavior don't make the news. This time, Chinese actions have sparked outrage almost 10,000 kilometers away. Residents in Nigeria's capital Abuja are enraged with the way they've been treated. A Chinese supermarket in Nigeria is at the center of controversy. The shop is located in a building run by the Chinese Chamber of Commerce in the Nigerian capital. The Chinese supermarket has been accused of racism by denying entry to African shoppers. After videos of the supermarket's blatant racism against local Nigerians went viral, the West African nation's consumer protection watchdog closed down the Chinese store. Officials of Nigeria's Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission locked down the Chinese supermarket until further notice. They also summoned the store's owner for investigation. So how did this instance of Chinese racism against Nigerians in their own country surface? It all started earlier this week. A group of Nigerians went to the Chinese Chamber of Commerce to shop from its supermarket. They were all stopped at the entrance by guards who said that people of only Chinese descent were allowed inside. And then the outcry began. Nigerian authorities have refused to reopen the Chinese supermarket. However, the racist attitude by Chinese towards Nigerians and Africans is nothing new. Reports highlight that Chinese social media is full of anti-African content. And despite calls for controlling racism on Chinese social media, Beijing has done almost nothing about it. Chinese racism came into spotlight even before the COVID-19 pandemic. Africans who were living in China became victims of Chinese racism repeatedly. Over the years, reports of Africans being treated unfairly by the Chinese have become far too frequent. It reached a point where governments had to intervene to douse the flames. And instead of facing the crisis, Beijing called the racism incidents a way to create animosity between China and Africa.
I want to say that if there are people who want to seize on an incident to exaggerate matters and sow discord in China's relations with African countries, that this is a doomed, futile effort. China and Africa have weathered many storms, and the cooperation has been successful and win-win. How relations are between China and Africa, and whether or not cooperation is good, African countries and the people of Africa know in their hearts exactly how things stand.
China's presence in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, remains massive. There are at least 10,000 Chinese living in Nigeria. And Beijing is credited for opening major ports and infrastructure projects in Abuja. However, China has openly engaged in arm twisting and discrimination against locals. And the most recent example is of the Chinese supermarket.
Some people just won't play nice. This is how bold the Chinese have become about their anti-black racism. But let's understand something. As reprehensible as this incident is, things didn't get to this point overnight. This is the result of decades of behavior that was allowed to go unchecked. If there's one thing that white supremacy should have taught us, it's that anti-black racism only understands being pushed back at. If you allow them to get away with any minor amount of disrespect, if you let them step on your toes, it won't be long before they're trying to walk all over your face. This is what's happened here. This is the end result of it. Africa's corrupt leaders have allowed these kinds of racists to take root. All the anti-black racism from Chinese media and Chinese corporations and Chinese citizens, and the Africans did nothing about it, and they didn't do anything for decades now. No sanctions, no forcing the Chinese to bend the knee. Somebody shows you disrespect, your top priority is to make them lose face. They have to be humiliated and humbled. Otherwise, taking pot shots at you will become habit-forming for everyone. This is why black Americans over here have told the Africans for decades that China isn't their friend and that they had better stop that anti-black racism early before those immigrants start practicing it inside of Africa and start getting bold about it. They didn't do it, and here's where they are. Nigerians are the native populations of that land. It is obscene for any foreigner from anywhere to attempt to tell them where they can and cannot go in their own country. And don't think for an instant that the Chinese government's not behind this kind of stuff. Because if somebody even sneezes in China, they're all over it. See, in China, practically every business is essentially owned by the state. The state has its hooks in all those businesses. You can't operate without the government basically having control over you. And this also goes for the businesses that are opened by Chinese immigrants in other places. most of them have very close ties to their home country. And that being the case, when you're talking about these supermarkets and such, these are not some mom and pop operations that are simply running business on their own. These are in fact basically outposts of the Beijing government. That's what's actually going on here. So as a result, all of them need to come under scrutiny. If the Chinese government let all of those businesses know that there would be punishment, or at the very least don't expect any support if you get caught engaging in anti-black racism, if the Beijing regime told them do not do that kind of behavior, then they wouldn't. The only reason that they're doing it is precisely because it is with the full support and encouragement of the Chinese government. They definitely wouldn't be doing it if Beijing told them not to. So whenever they have their citizens doing stuff like this, it's not because somebody got some harebrained scheme. It's because the boys in Beijing said, let's see how far we can push the envelope. How much can we walk all over these Negroes before they finally do something about it? See, when you let racism fester, the racists see it. It's not some victimless crime to decide that bigotry can go unpunished. And the only reason the Nigerians even acted in this case was because this incident went viral on social media. The Nigerian government acted because the world could see how China was making fools of them and humiliating and disgracing them in their own country. The Chinese would never allow the Nigerians to set up anything that they owned, much less lock the Chinese out of. They would make it clear, if the Chinese show up, it's their country, it's their everything. You don't have any rights that they're bound to respect. It took far too long, but now something has happened so egregious, so outrageous, that the Africans finally felt they had to do something. But what about the racists who ran that supermarket? Why are they still in Nigeria? At last report, the owner of that so-called supermarket was summoned by the Nigerian authorities to appear to answer for this. She had been summoned, but so far, there's been no response as to whether or not she's answered the summons. Now, according to the BBC, the Nigerian watchdog agency that closed that supermarket says that it's going to remain closed until she complies with the summons. Well, I hope that the Nigerians show more resolve than the Nigerian government showed when it comes to the U.S. military. The Nigerians cannot treat this as just some sort of civil consumer dispute. This is an international incident. The individuals involved should have had their visas torn up right in front of them and been immediately deported. Make an example that puts everyone on notice that if you come to Africa, you better show respect or you'll be shown the door. Because the Chinese aren't the only ones who have done stuff like this. You've also got other groups like the Indians who have also practiced anti-black racism inside of Africa. As far as they're concerned, they're doing a little bit of internal domestic colonization here. This is the lesson that goes along with not punishing this stuff earlier. This problem is far larger than just one supermarket. If the Africans have indeed learned their lesson, then there must also be severe consequences for every Chinese company in Nigeria. This is how you get racists to police themselves. That way everybody understands that if you know that so-and-so over here is some sort of racist, you let him know. He's going to cause problems for everyone. You have to also follow through with punishment. That way all of these racists know the rules of the road, and more importantly, they know who enforces the rules, and that it's not them. The Chinese discriminate against black people in China every day, mostly Africans, by the way, and nothing's been done about it. Nobody calls them out on it. How much more severe should the consequences be for racists from China who are inside of Africa, who have actually violated the laws and have shown no respect for the people who allowed them to be there? Not one of these racists has a right to be in Africa. Their presence in Africa is a privilege, not a right. They enter Africa at the African government's pleasure. And if you displease them, you're supposed to be shown the door. You violate that privilege, you should be punished harshly. That's how China does things. They punish people, many of them black, for little reason or no reason whatsoever, just to remind everybody that you shouldn't expect anything to be easy with them. You better watch your step. There should be leaders all across Africa wagging their fingers in the faces of their Chinese ambassadors in their countries. There should be individuals putting all of these delegates and such on the hot seat. Instead, they're letting Beijing give the usual lukewarm, empty, mamby-pamby statement about how, oh, we're great friends with the Africans, and there's absolutely no animosity here, and oh, we don't know what's going on, but it's not that serious. The Africans should be the main ones saying, oh, the hell it is serious. They should be. But they're not. This is being treated as just a PR issue and not the reckoning that it should be. This is why I followed the story about the U.S. military base in Niger. The U.S. government had been lecturing and condescending to the Nigerian government for a very long time, and that disrespect was ultimately what led to the decision to expel the U.S. military. But, as I also explained in my follow-up video from last week, the Nigerians are already talking about negotiations to allow the U.S. military right back in. They haven't even kicked them out yet. And they're already talking about time frames to bring them back. This is what I'm concerned about with the situation in Nigeria. This is the curse that has plagued black people for far too long. We are consistently inconsistent. We keep trying to have it both ways, and when you're dealing with evil, you're either going to make a deal with the devil or you're not. When dealing with anti-black racists, harsh lessons make for long memories, and those who fail to teach those lessons won't be respected and will ultimately be run out of existence. You want to know why every gang of foreigners since the Hyksos have been able to get their hooks into Africa and just run roughshod all over the place? It's because this is what the African response has been since time immemorial. Africans get attacked. They'll give some minor pushback, maybe, though it's not guaranteed. Though before it's all over, they're going to be trying to make deals with the people who are attacking them. This is what happened to Kemet, all the way to the Moors in Morocco, to Zimbabwe to South Africa. Everybody keeps looking for a reason not to put the hammer down on anti-black racism. You saw those demonstrations in support of the murderer Peter Liang. This is what fueled it. This is why we point out that a lot of the people immigrating to the U.S. come from cultures that practice anti-black racism. As I've always told you, you should only do business with people to the extent that they do business with you. If someone does a lot of business with you, then you should reciprocate and do a lot of business with them. If someone only occasionally does business with you, then you should only occasionally do business with them. If someone does no business with you, then you shouldn't spend one thin dime with them. And if somebody is barring you from even entering their store, then you should shut them down completely and anyone else who might have any ideas about doing the same. A lot of countries have problems with China and with their inherent disrespect, but only Africa is in a position to truly put some pain on them. I've been saying this since my classic video about Asian racism towards black people that I made over 15 years ago. I predicted China's population crashes, plural. I also talked about how China wants to get into Africa and economically colonize it, and how Africa's so-called leaders were letting it happen. Now, all during this time, we had tethers and Africans in my comments section saying China's a good thing for Africa. Why, they're building some roads. Yeah, only 1 or 2 roads that go directly from Africa's mineral deposits straight to the ports so that it can be more expeditiously sent to China. And when it comes to whatever little old so-called infrastructure that China claims to be building, most of which hasn't even been built, by the way, tons of promises, but no actual results. It's all being done to make things a little bit easier, but only for the people who the Chinese are sending to Africa. They're not doing anything for the Africans. They're doing it all for their own populations and what they're going to do to make things cushy for them. And we see what the result has been. This is the final verdict for all of those folks, many of them from Africa, who kept saying that, oh, the stories about Chinese racism toward Africans, it's overblown and we got the situation under control. And now, for the umpteenth time, we see that no, the reports of Chinese racism against Africans wasn't exaggerated at all, and no, the Africans do not have it under control. Chinese operate just like the white supremacists do because both of them subscribe to the idea of anti-black racism. And as Brother Khalid Muhammad pointed out, all of these anti-black racists, they take into account, they calculate that, oh, there's going to be a response, there'll be some minor pushback, black folks will be counted on for that. But they won't be consistent about it. And they won't push back as hard as they possibly could. It'll be just a little bit of pushback. They've already taken that into account. They're already counting on there being some sort of backlash. They're already counting on there being some social media viral stories that force the government to do something. They've already taken that into account. What the Africans have to do is to change the calculus and make it where, no, this is not going to be some one and done thing. And that this is something that's going to be causing problems for a lot of people, not just one so-called supermarket owner. That's how you change people's behavior. Make it where they can no longer count on the old assumptions. Oh, you're calculating that we're only going to do one little response for a specific period of time? Well, you're not calculating that the response is actually going to be 100 times stronger and is going to last 100 times longer. Now, at this point, what I want to know is, where are all the racial allies that we were told we had? Got so many of these Negroes, so many of these white liberal wannabes, so many of these tethers and clowns, always telling us that we have to focus on allies. Well, here China is being racist, and the allies from China are nowhere to be found. So all those folks who have been online thinking they were saving face by saying, oh, no, the Chinese are not being racist towards the Africans, you can't point to any incidents, some sort of minor event is not indicative of a larger pattern, well, now here's the final proof. And you can go ahead and claim that you've got the situation under control, but we know what the reality is. You want to stop this anti-black racism before it goes any farther? There's going to have to be a permanent change to how these things are dealt with. A standard has to be set. Notice my wording. I said a standard has to be set because right now the standard is just be doormats, and that doesn't work. We keep seeing these Negroes who keep saying that the African governments are getting tough with France or that they're wagging their finger at the U.S. Well, just keep in mind, if you're not also getting tough with China, then you're simply cracking down on one or two bad actors, but you're leaving the other 50% of bad actors in place. So we'll see if the Nigerians, and by extension other African countries, finally decide to deal with this problem that they've allowed to fester for so long. But mark my words, if they go back to hitting the snooze button and they just decide to, as usual, pretend as if the issue's been dealt with when in fact nothing's been dealt with at all, well, what they're going to find is that taking abuse from China, that's going to be business as usual. Good day. And be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Mouse, Lokethes, Jimmy Whitfield, Stay Positive, and Liban Gurhan. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.